I'll start by just kind of sharing who I am, how I got here, what I do. So, my name is Cynthia Marcus, and I'm a registered social worker and a counselor in private practice. I specialize in supporting parents. I first started most of my career, over 10 years of my work has been in the area of children's mental health. So, I worked at an agency where the focus is really on the kids. And I did work with parents a lot in that work, but it was really around giving parents tips, supporting parents on how to support their kids. So it was always about the kids' mental health and the kids' well-being, not so much the parents. And we would talk to parents about those things, but we wouldn't dive in. We wouldn't, that was never really the focus. It wasn't allowed to be the focus really because we have a really specific area. And I always liked working with parents, but then when I became a mom myself, I started seeing it a bit differently and just sort of realizing how much pressure's on parents, how hard it is to really do all the things we want to do for our kids when we're struggling ourselves and there's so much on our plates. I really started to feel just like there's so much information out there and so many opinions about what's right and wrong, and everything's conflicting. Um, there's so much guilt, there's so much shame. And I experienced all of this. I still do sometimes. And it just sort of became really clear to me that parent mental health is so important, but not often um, acknowledged and supported. So I really decided to focus more on learning more about parent mental health and really trying to combine my experience. I do think it's valuable for us to know about kids' mental health and ways that adults can support kids. It's absolutely important in my role as a mom, but it doesn't work unless we pay attention to how parents are actually doing. And it's one thing to know the content, it's another thing to implement it and do it. And it's way easier said than done. So now I'm really trying to work from a position that kind of looks at the big picture. And I'm hoping that this talk today will both give kind of some perspective, some ideas, maybe a different attitude about kind of what might be going on with your kids, and also maybe a little bit of validation or empathy around kind of how you're doing as a parent. And I'm saying parent, I know there might be people joining today that aren't parents, and that's totally okay. Anybody who's in a caregiving role is a-okay, or just wants to learn more. But I'm just going to use parent because I think it reaches a lot of people. I'm going to talk a little bit about logistics. So obviously, Facebook Live is not my forte. Had a little bit of a hiccup trying to get going, and I'm still not sure that it's going the right way, but we're giving it a go. Um, I am going to be trying to kind of watch comments, but it's going to be hard to do that while I'm talking. So I'm going to, I'll pause periodically and just kind of check in. And if anybody has questions to clarify or something very general based on what I've just shared, I'm happy to try to answer. I'm not going to be able to answer, uh, in-depth questions, anything specific about your family. Part of that's just to protect people's confidentiality. And it's just, I'm going to be talking about some foundational general things that I think are important, but I also know it's just like scratching the surface, right? And some of these tools might be enough for people, and some of them might not be quite enough. Um, and then it might be more helpful to talk one on one. So I can try to answer some questions, but nothing really detailed or examples, those sorts of things. More like clarification and general stuff based on what I'm sharing. Um, I'm going to dive into the content now and we'll see how much I can get through. We're going to have about 45 minutes at this point, 30 more minutes since I was slow getting started. And we'll see where it goes. So when we talk about emotion regulation, It's all about emotions, right? That's really the core of it all. So we need to be able to recognize and understand emotions to be able to actually help our kids learn emotion regulation skills. And how we handle our own emotions and support our kids when they're having tough emotions is really what's key in teaching emotion regulation. So I'm going to give you a few, like I said, kind of foundational tips and information to try to help explain the what I think is an important start, and then you can always build on it. I also want to say that not everything I share is going to resonate with everybody. There's like a million strategies out there, and it can be really hard to find the right one for your family. Sometimes it can take a lot of trial and error. Sometimes it's frustrating, and that's okay. So if it doesn't fit for you, that's totally fine. And if it does, that's great. So I'm going to start by talking about how our brains work. So there's a guy named Daniel Siegel. He's done a lot of research. He's written some books. He's author of The Whole Brain Child, which I really love. And he came up with the hand model of the brain. So I'm going to do a really quick um, demonstration. He does a much more detailed one, which you can look up on YouTube. You can find lots of information on him if you'd like. And I'm just going to show you kind of how our brains work so we have an idea of what to do to help calm ourselves. So we're going to pretend that my hand is the brain and my thumb here is the downstairs brain or the animal part of the brain. And this part is really the part that's responsible for emotion, instincts, basic needs, survival, all that animal stuff. Then we have the upstairs brain, which is this part of my hand here, this part of our head here. And this is the part that we as humans are lucky to have. We are able to problem solve, think things through, think logically, rationally, kind of put pieces together. Animals can't, a lot of animals can't do that. When these two parts of the brain are working together, things are fine. I can come up against a stressor and kind of problem solve my way through it. So if I'm realizing that I'm running late in the morning and I have lots of stuff I need to get done before I can head out the door, I might start getting a little overwhelmed. When we start getting overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, angry, really any emotion in excess, we can flip our lids. That's what Dan calls it. And what that means is that that thinking part of the brain, totally out the window. We can't even, it's not online, can't engage it at all. We're all in emotion brain. So if I'm running late and I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm nervous, and my lid flips, I might start kind of shouting orders. I might just be like frazzled and running around. I might start to cry. I might start to hyperventilate. Everybody reacts differently. It might not even be that noticeable on the outside, but like there's like an energy and a sort of feeling, a stress feeling. If I can keep myself calm and not flip my lid, then I can kind of slow down and be like, okay, I need to get lunches. I need to find the kids' shoes. I need to get everybody in the car. We got to find hats. We need to do sunscreen, whatever. I can think it through and kind of go logically, rationally, and stay calm. Usually we can get through it pretty quickly. We all flip our lids sometimes, right? And kids flip their lids even more often because they haven't had the experience and their prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, that doesn't even get fully developed until we're like 25. So they're already at a disadvantage because they don't have much of a thinking brain to begin with. I know the people interested in this event were sharing different ages of different kids, right? And I saw like from 2 up to 8. There might be other people with different ages as well. But I have two kids. They're almost 2 and 5. And the 2-year-old is like flipping her lid at everything, right? Like she's like flipping her lid about not getting like the blueberries that she wants in that moment. She's flipping her lid because I'm not letting her walk around the house with open markers, right? And so she's much less able to problem solve and rationalize with me than my 5-year-old, who's developed some skills at kind of calming or at least responding to my attempts to calm her. So I'm going to stop for a second and check in if this is going okay so far. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to type them in the comments. If all is good, you can give a little thumbs up. Okay, I'll take a quick look back in case anything else comes up, but I'm not seeing anything. And it's very possible I'll miss things, so I appreciate patience as I try to navigate this world of Facebook Live. So we all flip our lids. Um, I think we focus a lot on kids flipping their lids, but for the purposes of this talk, it's really important that we recognize how we flip our lids too. And we do, I do. I've known this stuff for a long time. I've been practicing it with my kids for years. I had the luxury of learning it and really understanding it before I had kids. And it's still so hard to actually do it some of the time because they trigger us. Kids push our buttons. We have all kinds of other stuff going on in our lives that makes it hard to stay calm. One of the things that helps me when I'm trying to kind of help my kids is to remember a phrase. So I'm going to show a little, I got this book. Um, it's an old book, and it's actually been a long time since I've looked at it, but the author, Ross Green, he um, he uses a phrase in this book, kids do well if they can. And the the point really is to look at misbehavior not as an intentional, manipulative, um, challenging thing that kids are doing just to sort of push our buttons and stuff. Um, and what he says is that it's really about lacking skills and um, not having the understanding of how to do things differently yet. So they're just kind of doing things the only way they know. And so having an almost 2-year old, like she's not going to stop and be like, well, mother, may I please take this marker to the table? No, she's just going to like start screaming and crying and drop herself to the floor because it's all she knows. My 5-year-old might even do that. She might even like start shouting and arguing because I'm saying, no, you can't walk around the house with markers. But I can then stop her and talk to her about it because she's had the experience of learning to be able to respond a different way. And there's lots of kids who are older. There's lots of adults who don't have great regulation skills because it's a lacking skill that wasn't maybe learned as well as it could have been along the way. So I'm just going to take a quick look. I flipped this morning when we were running late for school since someone wasn't listening well. Yep, I do it all the time. Definitely happens in this house. So I'm going to give you some ideas about how to respond. So we all flip our lids. So first of all, I'm also going to kind of share this stuff. Perfect world, this is what would be great if we could do it, and then after I'll kind of talk more about why it doesn't always go so well. So truthfully, if my kid's lid is flipping and I come in with a flipped lid, we've got two emotion brains trying to talk to each other. I don't know about you, but I've never had an experience where that's gone well. Even if I think about like adult conversations, if I'm getting into an argument with my husband, I'm stressed about something, he's stressed about something. If we're both trying to get our point across, we're both stressed about something different, we're not really hearing each other because that requires a thinking brain. We're just reacting. So to really help your kid calm down, you got to calm yourself down first and bring your own lid down, and then you can use your thinking brain to soothe their emotion brain so that their thinking brain can come back down. So the best way to do this from my perspective, and something I've practiced with my kids for a long time, is empathy and validation. So what that really means is talking in like emotion words, soothing the emotion brain, and really connecting with it. Because remember, this part of the brain, the thinking brain, is gone. I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to somebody when they're upset and try to reason with them. In my experience, it doesn't usually go very well, even if they say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know how much is sinking in. I know if I'm stressed, my husband's like, well, just try this. Does not hit the spot for me, does not work. It just sometimes makes me more frustrated, right? You don't get it. You're not listening. You don't understand. And kids go through the same thing. They still they can't say it. They don't consciously really know what's going on, but they're reacting because they don't feel understood. They don't feel validated. They don't feel supported. So when my youngest is crying and tantruming on the floor because I just took away the marker she's probably just going to draw on the walls with, my go-to with my kids is saying, "Come here. I know. I know you're upset." Giving them a hug. "I know you're sad that I took the marker away. You really want that marker. You're so frustrated. You're so disappointed." Really just like labeling the emotions. My kids are good with touch, hugging. Not all kids will be, but that's sort of our like cue. We're going to try this empathy thing. They know if I say, "Come here, hug," I know. I'm really just trying to like connect with them and say, like, "I get it. You're upset. This sucks. You're not happy right now. And I hear that. And it's okay to have feelings." I think that's the big message. We live in a world that's very much like, nope, we're not going to deal with the feelings. We're just going to problem solve. We're going to move forward. I think a lot of people, the gut reaction is to be like, stop crying. This is ridiculous. It's just a marker. Go play with something else. And it's no one's fault that this is our gut reaction, but it doesn't tend to be particularly helpful when our kids aren't able to calm down. And so when I'm saying to them, like, it's okay, you're allowed to feel sad, the intention is that it soothes this part of the brain, and then their thinking brain can come down. And then usually I'll see a change in them, like maybe the yelling stops or they kind of just melt into me. And then you can move on to the next step. And that's going to look different for everybody. It could be um, giving them a choice, it could be problem solving something together. It could be setting a limit or having some kind of a consequence if it was something like hitting. Because I know that that's an issue that people have brought up, like kids who get really aggressive, right? If my daughter, actually, my youngest or my oldest used to bite. She was speech delayed and couldn't express herself. So she started biting at daycare when kids took things from her because she couldn't say no, give it back. So she was getting aggressive. Was she doing it, like, because she was being malicious? No, she was doing it 'cause she had no other way of expressing herself, but so by kind of bringing her in and saying, "You're mad because friend took your toy," then once she feels heard and validated, then we can problem solve and say, like, "Nope, you cannot have that toy. Fighting is not the answer." Using empathy and validation does not mean you're condoning whatever the behavior is. It's it's almost separate. It's like the empathy and the validation is just about saying, like, I hear you, I get you, I love you, you're safe with me, and I will love you no matter what. Then, once they feel all like nurtured by you, then it's what's the next step? Setting the limit. No biting. And because you bit, now you don't get X. Or um, it could be even, I know some are struggling with kids who are anxious. So it could also be you you're feeling really anxious, you're feeling really scared. I'm going to use the word co-regulation is really about doing the regulating with them. So when I'm labeling my kids' feelings, I'm teaching them regulation. When I am breathing slowly with them, they can pick up on that and mirror it without even consciously understanding. And when we regulate with them together, over time, they learn how to do it themselves and they start to pick up these skills. And that's really what leads to self regulation. You can't just teach them by saying, do this, do that, do that. They need that hand over hand support to do it together. And then they start to pick up how to do it more and more themselves. So when I'm co-regulating with an anxious kid, my 5-year-old, when she was just turned 4, I guess it was last summer, we signed her up for soccer after doing next to nothing because of COVID. And she was excited until she got there and saw tons of kids and adults and realized I wasn't going to be on the field with her. And just, she was okay at first. And then I think it just, there was some kind of a breaking point, and then she's like on the ground crying. Um, and it took a lot of persistence to support her through that. But really, I say support her through it because we um we made sure she felt like safe and validated. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be overwhelmed. And then when she was calm, we really did a lot of problem solving and planning about how to take little steps to help her overcome her fear. Because quitting after one day wasn't an option for us. So knowing our own kind of like boundaries and expectations for our kids is really important. But if we just set the boundary and expectation, like saying you have to go, and we're not making a plan on how to make that easier for you, we're not talking about how anxious you feel, it would be likely a lot harder. At least in my experience. Sometimes kids will still comply without the validation and the empathy, but I think what happens there, what can happen is that it's not so much a because they feel connected or supported, it's because that's just sort of the rules. And when they feel like they're connected or supported, that relationship really helps things tend to go smoother overall. Um, so when I do yell at my kids, they maybe feel a little bit more like they can like trust me and love me, and it's not as hard maybe as it would be um, if that's just how it always is, and they don't feel kind of like they have a voice. I realize I've been rambling. And I'm wondering if now's the point to stop and see if anybody has any reflections, any thoughts, any ideas about what I'm saying or needs any clarification. I'll keep an eye on the comments. Oh, resonating. That's good to hear. Okay. So, another thing I want to touch on before kind of going into the why this is so hard side of things is how helpful modeling can be. And like kids learn from what they see, right? Good, bad, otherwise. Some of that's us, some of that's peers, some of that's teachers. Like they soak it all in, right? Um, it's not always easy, but what I really do try to do is use a lot of feelings words and tell my kids how I'm feeling and talk about ways that I solve problems. Um, we actually were reading a Franklin in the Dark book one day, and um, it ended up turning into a conversation about my 5-year-old's fears. And she said she was scared of dogs, and we kind of just started talking through. And she clearly, her lid wasn't flipped in this moment, right? This is more of a preventative measure. She was calm, and that's why this conversation helped. We talked about how like all her different experiences of dogs. When have dogs been scary? When haven't they been scary? And is this something you want to try to overcome? Or and then we just started talking about different options, and she's like, I want to try to go to a dog. And we talked about how like, we'll only go up to a dog that has a leash, and we're going to like ask the owner if the dog is um, a friendly dog that we can go and get close to, and then put her hand out. And so we go through all the steps. And she was so proud of herself after she did it. And she's still definitely hesitant. My youngest is like the biggest animal lover in the world. My oldest is not, but she wanted to try. And we talked about those feelings, and we talked about how it's okay for us to be scared. Mom and dad are scared of things too. We have to take steps to try to face things that are scary for us. There are days when I know I'm flipping my lid and I'm kind of snippy with the kids. And then I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm just having a bad day. I'm tired. You know, I don't really say it as much to my 2-year-old, but I'll say to my 5-year-old, like, your sister's been like kind of grumpy today. So I'm sorry that I'm being snippy. And I'm showing her it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have a bad day, and I'm holding myself to the same standard as I hold her. If I'm expecting her to apologize for saying something she shouldn't have, or doing something she shouldn't have, then why shouldn't I do the same? So by showing them kind of acting the way we want them to act, essentially, that's the best way to teach them, from my perspective, anyway. There's a lot that goes into it, though, right? Again, easier said than done, but it is in the perfect world something that's helpful. So I am seeing a couple of comments. Validating but not condoning. Yeah, it's like I see it as like almost two separate steps, right? Like I'm here for you, I love you, and like this behavior wasn't okay. So how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And it is kind of it takes a lot of practice and experimenting, and different kids respond differently. Oh, I missed one up here too. Trouble when she is not listening but calm. Haha. Versus when I need to help her regulate. Yeah, that's a bit different. I was actually thinking about this. Was it yesterday? I'm trying to remember the example. It's not coming to me. But yeah, sometimes kids they're trying to figure out they're trying to like figure out the world, right? So I've definitely had times when my kids are like these cooperative little like independent angels, and I'm just soaking it up. And then like 2 days later, they're both pushing every one of my buttons and intentionally not like following directions. And I say intentionally, kids do well if they can, but it's not like a clear like I'm emotional and this is why I'm reacting. It almost seems more like a normal like boundary pushing, trying to figure out like, who's the boss here? What can I get away with? And it's very frustrating, but it's also really normal. Um, it's different, but similar because I think about things like rewards can be helpful. We do this like check mark X thing with my daughter sometimes when things are starting to get a little wonky. We're like, okay, you need to get check marks. Every time we notice something going well, we're going to give you a check mark. And if you don't get enough, well, then you can't watch TV before supper, or you can't. So she kind of has to earn her rewards. And by giving her that praise, helps her to kind of keep on track. And we remind her, oh, if you keep doing that, you're going to get an X. So I try to be, like very matter of fact with it, not emotional and angry about it, because that's when I'm upset, it definitely makes her more upset. There's definitely a correlation there. Um, so that's one way. Problem solving with them when you're not in the middle of the situation. Like, how are we going to deal with this? This is not okay. You're getting upset. I'm getting upset. But that's tricky because every kid's going to be different with that. And I see one more question. Son gets so frustrated when things don't go how he plans, or if he doesn't get his way. How can I help him calm down from a level 10 to about a 2? Well, a 10 to a 2 is a big leap. So even if you get from a 10 to like a 9 or 8, I think that's probably a more realistic initial goal. Um, but I think so if things aren't going his way, um, like I would wonder if you've tried kind of the validation and the empathy and seeing what happens. Now, the thing is that if this isn't something you normally do, it isn't kind of your go-to, um, then it can take some practice. Now, my girls, like most of their lives, this is the response they've had because this is what I know. And I've had the luxury of having that information for a long time. But if that's not what usually happens, then probably the first few times you do this, it's going to be a little weird for everybody because there's a learning curve, right? There's a learning curve for the adult doing it, and then the kids also kind of like, well, what's this? How do I respond to this? Um, if you're able to just sort of like focus more on their feelings, like you're disappointed that things aren't going your way, this is so frustrating. I would feel so frustrated too if this was happening. I'd be curious to see if that brings it down a little bit. Um, some kids can calm down in like, a few seconds. Depends on what the problem is too, right? Like there's big lid flips and then there's like little lid flips. Like the marker thing isn't really a big lid flip. She makes it seem big, but we get through it quickly, right? Um, Sometimes when these problems have been like ingrained for a long time too, it takes a lot of practice to get out of those bad habits. And so sometimes trying to use empathy and validation can end up being like sitting with your kid for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, which is hard because we don't always have the time. But in the long run, if your kid starts to feel like this part of their brain is getting soothing and you get it, then hopefully they calm. And the more that you do it, the more it reassures that part of the brain so that maybe the next time their lid doesn't have to flip so much. But it really is practice. So maybe I'll dive into like this is pretty hard stuff, right? How do we actually do this? Like there's so many barriers. Like I'm teaching this, at the same time I'm like, oh, it's so hard for me. And then I know this is a lot of information and like a lot more pressure for everybody who's listening, right? Because it's a lot of work. It takes time, right? It's a lot easier to yell at my kid, just calm down and listen to me, than it is to say, come here, give me a hug. You're sad, you're frustrated. And sometimes when my kids don't calm down as quick as I'm expecting them to, I start to like my lids just flip again. Um, so it's really hard. It's hard to manage our own emotions, our own triggers. It's hard to change our habits. Like, how long have I been doing it this way? And now I'm having to practice something brand new. It's hard to be consistent. I don't do it all the time. Like, every time my kid's getting upset, I don't say, oh, come give me a hug. Like, sometimes we just sort of move through it, right? Because a toddler is going to be flipping their lid like all day long. Sometimes they don't need hugs and comfort every time. Sometimes it's just sort of a little frustration that we can redirect, right? But when there's big feelings, I really do try to use that empathy and validation and hugs, co-regulation. Um, our own like just the pressure on us to do all these things can be debilitating, right? And the guilt that we feel when it doesn't go the way that we want it to. I have like specific things that set me off. Like my oldest will get in moods where she demands that I play games with her that I hate, like family, like these like very specific, like imaginary games. And I'm like, I just need a break. And then if she starts yelling at me, oh, you better watch my lid flip. So I'm aware of what sets me off and I have to work really hard to not react. We also have like our own mental health stuff, right? Anxiety, depression, other things going on, just family circumstances that make life difficult, not enough support, right? Trying to do so many things. Now I have to try to use empathy when my kid's melting down, but I'm trying to cook dinner, right? And it is like it's just so much. So that being said, I hope that nobody like leaves this going like, oh no, I'm doing it all wrong, because I think the truth is that we're probably all doing much better than we give ourselves credit for, or that anybody else usually gives us credit for. Um, but I do want to try to leave you with some tips to kind of like give you some ideas about how to manage. Now, some of these I feel like are just like what everybody says. Like, okay, how do you calm yourself down? Well, you can take a break, you can take some breaths, you can like have some alone time, you can try to build exercise into your day, you can try to connect with people. Like, I don't think that's anything new for anybody. I think like the whole like self-care, like we all need to engage in self-care movement. It's a bit over the top because I don't think a bath is going to make this all better. But on the other hand, sometimes intentionally trying to build some of that stuff in can make a big difference, especially if we really prioritize it and make it consistent. So, trying to prioritize your own self care, finding ways to get your own support, um, finding the things. I think like some of us don't even, until I knew what the lid flipping was, like I didn't even know what I was doing, right? Like I think also just the awareness of like, oh yes, my kid flips his lid and I flip my lid, and then we can't communicate, and like I got to do something about that. Even a small step can make a big difference, right? Like even just being able to notice, oh, my lid is flipped. I'm just going to walk away from this screaming child for a moment. They're safe. I'm going to go take a breath. I'm going to go like give myself some positive message and then come back and try to handle it differently than if I just reacted. So even just like awareness of what's going on for you emotionally and just trying to tweak something, sometimes that can go a long way to making some changes. Um, One thing that I do think can be really helpful that I often remind myself is just I try to put myself in my kids' shoes. So when I'm like totally done because they're melting down about all the stupidest things, because who really cares about the markers and who really cares about, you know, what toy your friends next door have that you don't have or whatever. I just try to remember like they're little kids and their problems are so different from ours. And these are real problems for them. Even if it feels totally stupid, it's um, it's real for them. And when I remember that, I can have a little more empathy, right? And just sort of connect with them more genuinely. Because like fake empathy, I don't think really is going to work so well either. So you have to really believe, like care, like actually care what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and it's not always easy to do because obviously our problems are much bigger than theirs. But um, but they're only going to learn how to deal with their little problems if we can help them and teach them so that when they have bigger problems, they're more ready for them too. I think another thing that's really important to mention is that sometimes we can't do it on our own, and sometimes we can kind of figure out what we need to keep ourselves calm, so we can actually be the parents we want to be. But sometimes we can't do it ourselves, and that's okay. Um, it's totally, I think everybody benefits from therapy at one point in their life or another, in and out of therapy. I've been in and out of my own therapy because we all have baggage, right? Like we all have stuff that um, makes us who we are, good, bad, or otherwise. And it can really help to have support to talk things through sometimes. So I'm giving you a bunch of tips. Might be a lot, might not be. And it might be enough, but it might not be. And it might feel like there's too more going on for your family than you can get help from this talk. So sometimes it is helpful to have kind of one-on-one conversations. So if anybody is interested in counseling with me, you can take a look at my website and book a free 15-minute consultation, and we could talk about kind of what you're looking for and answer any questions and see if it's a fit. And therapy can really look like whatever you need it to. Like for some people, it might just be like a couple of sessions to talk about like examples of things happening at home and getting some ideas about how to respond differently. That's totally fine. It might be a little bit longer and talk more about kind of how you're coping with things. It might be like on and off for a long time. Um, Talk about all the stuff from your life and all the baggage, right? And different people have different needs and different people are ready for different things, and all of it's okay. Um, I'm happy to meet people wherever they're at. I think there's a place for all different kinds of approaches. One last thing I want to leave people with is just knowing, I hope that um, everyone can remind themselves that there's, even when things are hard, there's lots of things that you're doing well. Like it's hard for me to remember the things I'm doing well sometimes, especially on those really rough days. Um, but our kids don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be okay. And when we have a decent relationship with them where we show them, I love you, I care about what you think, I care about how you feel, I'm here for you, and repair with them when we mess up and admit that we've made a mistake and acknowledge kind of our role in things and the mistakes we've made and how that's okay. I think, you know, that's about as good as we can do. We can never guarantee that we're going to create these glorious humans, but they are their own people. All we can do is try our best to set them up. And so I hope everyone give themselves a pat on the back for something they've done well, and remember that these are some ideas and some tips and not a prescription that you need to follow. And if you can't follow this, that's okay. Even if you leave with like an idea about something or even just validation you're doing something well, then great. take what helps and leave what doesn't. We don't need more of what doesn't help. We have enough of that. So I'll just kind of, if there's any final questions, a couple of minutes. If anybody has anything they want clarified, or if there's any final thoughts, then I'd be happy to try to help. Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments right now. So um, if anybody wants to reach out by email, you can feel free. And oh, you're welcome. And yeah, maybe I'll do another one of these in the future. Maybe I'll have technology figured out a little bit better. Well, we can hope. So thank you all for coming and joining, and take care. Bye.